Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Lars Schall. I am an independent financial journalist from Germany, and on behalf of Matterhorn Asset Management in Zurich, Switzerland, I am now connected in Sao Paulo, Brazil, with the roving eye correspondent of Asia Time, Pepe ESCOBAR. Hi, Pepe.
Hi, thanks Lars for having me, and thanks to Matterhorn as well. Pleasure to be with you.
It's great to have you with us. Pepe, you've just published recently a new book, The Empire of Chaos. Tell us who or what is this Empire of Chaos?
Right. This is my homage, in fact, to a very good French political scientist, Alain Joxe. He's not very well known across Europe or in the US. He's very, very good in France, but he's sidelined because he speaks and writes his own mind. So he's not on message in France. In 2002, he published a wonderful book called L'Empire du Chaos, which translates as Empire of Chaos, of course. I was reading this book in the run-up towards the invasion occupation of Iraq, and this was one of my, I would say, top 3 or 4 books when I was waiting for the war to start in Egypt, in Jordan, and then in Iraq. What he was saying at the time was more or less that how the empire, based, of course, in the beginning of the Bush administration, the first year and a half, let's put it this way, how they promote chaos, divide and rule style all over the world, and at the same time, they could be hit by blowback from all over the world. And this is what's happened for the past 12, 13 years. The empire, which is, we can say more or less, has a physical presence among the Washington Wall Street elites and some parts of the European elite as well, exporting chaos in terms of bullying, bombing, aggression, invasion, occupation, etc., destabilizing of whole nations, regime change, color revolutions, etc., and at the same time is hit by blowback from developments all over the world, including, of course, the financial crisis, which was created by the empire, and then the blowback also hit the empire and the vassals badly. When I was assembling my book, which is a collection of columns that I wrote from 2009 to 2014, basically the spectrum of the Obama years so far, since the first months of Obama in office in early 2009, when I assembled the columns, and at the end, reading them all in sequence, they are ordered chronologically, you could see you could see the roadmap and blow by blow of this chaos being unleashed in different parts of the planet, and the blowback coming from all over the place as well. So it's an homage, of course, to Joxe. I think it encapsulates what I have been writing for the past few years, and how the empire itself has behaved or misbehaved across the world.
Mm. As you know, the Freemasons have this expression, order out of chaos. Is this something that is in the minds of people in Washington?
It's interesting because they are, in fact, it's a huge lament in Washington, especially, and the Washington-New York axis, that the order that America was responsible for these past 50, 60 years is unraveling, their own expression. So this disorder that is now all over the world, they didn't cause it. They tried to impose order, but now the world rebelled, and now the whole order that was guaranteed by the exceptionalist nation, indispensable, of course, is unraveling. So they never analyzed themselves and the role of the Bush administration and the Obama administration, which I see as a continuum, provoking this global unraveling.
Where do you see the Empire of Chaos heading into in general?
Well, I would have a very long answer to that, but let's put it this way. They simply cannot understand the move, especially after 9/11, from the BRICS in the developing world, in countries that are in an intermediary stage and could become great regional powers, much bigger regional powers in the future, South Korea, Iran, Indonesia, etc., towards a multipolar world. There's no wonder the BRICS, for instance, are absolutely hated, especially in the Beltway in Washington, because they are organizing themselves, organizing this push towards a multipolar world, currency swaps, trying to fight for a basket of currencies as the global reserve currency, more economic integration, and of course, the number one worry for the old elites, which is the Russia-China strategic partnership. Not only they don't understand how it works, but they abhor it, of course, and they fear it. And now, with these past few moves, when you have pivoting to China in one way, and this pivoting against Russia in Ukraine together, the Empire of Chaos, they basically bought a fight against the two key emerging powers of the 21st century. And they don't know how to deal with it, period. They are puzzled by Russia's countermoves, and they are puzzled by China's enormous trade commerce offensive all across Eurasia. So I would sum it all up, the mood between Washington and Wall Street at the moment as absolute perplexity, in fact.
Yeah, the war on terror was more or less directed against Russia and China. I think we can agree on that. Can we also agree on the assumption of mine that China and Russia are ultimately the beneficiaries of the war on terror?
In fact, China was much more than Russia, I would say, the number one beneficiary. They got oil contracts in Iraq, for instance. Yeah. They got gas contracts in Central Asia when they built that Turkmenistan via Uzbekistan, Western China gas pipeline, which is, in fact, is as important for them as the new signings they made for the Altai pipeline and the Power of Siberia pipeline with Russia. This pipeline from Turkmenistan is very important, and China, they did it by themselves at the time when the US was trying to control Pipelineistan in Central Asia. They had, I would say, monthly missions, envoys going to Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan all the time, trying to coerce these governments to do pipelines that will revert to the West's benefit, to Europe or with American participation. In fact, China pulled it off. In Iraq, the same thing. You get Gazprom had deals after the auction of oil fields, Petronas from Malaysia. The Americans got small deals compared to what they were thinking. You remember at the time in 2003 when Wolfowitz was saying, we are the new OPEC and we're going to control oil all over the world. In fact, they didn't. So it was a major disaster. And of course, the blowback in political, religious, or religious as a disguise for politics was much worse for the US because they don't control Iraq. They will never control Iraq again. They won't control Syria. They tried for the past 3 years, and Assad must go still there. And of course, Iran got much more influence from Afghanistan to Iraq. So what did the war on terror actually accomplish? In fact, they accomplished major blowback from Northern Africa to Western China, I would say. There are a lot of Uyghurs as jihadis since the late 90s. I saw a lot of them in Massoud's prisons in Afghanistan. Chechens as well. Chechens working not only in the Caucasus but in the Middle East. And they are not the only, I would say, tangible proof that the war on terror generated its own perpetuation, in fact, is Daesh. That's how the Arabs call ISIS, ISIL, the caliphate run by the guy with that famous $7,000 watch, Caliph Ibrahim. He is an indirect product of the war on terror in Iraq, in fact. He was a direct continuation of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, which, he became powerful in Iraq in 2004, 5, 6, as a reaction against the war on terror on the Iraqi chapter. So there is a continuation of the Iraq on terror in a way that the way the Americans conducted and the way the blowbacks happen generate a recycling and a remixing of the war on terror in perpetuity, from Syria, Iraq to Afghanistan as well. And now we have American troops still in Afghanistan, and we have American troops coming back to Iraq. So it's all over again. It's completely crazy. It is the snake eating its own tail all the time.
Yeah, and now we have the crisis in the Ukraine. How does this fit into the picture?
The crisis in Ukraine, I would say it's different. It basically concerns NATO expansion. They tried it in 2008 in Georgia. It didn't work. The Russian response was very forceful. And they tried earlier this year in Ukraine with an absolutely messy outcome that obviously nobody in Washington or in Brussels was thinking about. Because now they have inherited, I would say between commas, an absolutely failed state with a debt that could reach up to $80 billion. Nobody wants to pay this debt in the long run, not the US, certainly not Brussels. So the country now is indebted to the IMF, and the IMF will keep disbursing $1-2 billion here and there after their initial promise of $15 billion. This won't be enough to pay Ukraine's bills. They still need transit gas from Russia, so they cannot antagonize Russia politically. Rhetorically, it's another story. So, and what is Europe going to do with Ukraine? They're not going to accept the Ukraine into the EU anytime soon, even if Poroshenko is claiming that after his reforms, once again between commas, he'll submit a referendum if Ukraine should be admitted to NATO. Obviously, a lot of countries inside NATO will see there will be a direct confrontation of Russia, and many will back off. So it's cui bono, this story in Ukraine. Nobody, in fact. And Russia already had paid a lot of Ukraine's debts, in fact, and gave them a lot of loans before the February Maidan coup. According to the Russians themselves, over $30 billion. Because they needed to shore up Ukraine, their neighbor, and of course, in the east, their industries are intertwined with Russian industry as well. So what the EU is going to do with Ukraine? Nobody in his right mind in EU countries would like, if submitted to a referendum, would like to admit Ukraine to the European Union. So this is also going nowhere. But in terms of the empire of chaos policy of divide and rule and bullying adversaries, in this case Russia, they created a problem, a huge problem for Russia in Russia's western borderlands. So this is their profit, let's put it this way, in the short to medium term.
But what do you think about the fact that, for example, South Stream will not be built, but instead the gas will now go to Turkey?
I think this is an absolutely strike and stroke of genius, Lars, in fact. I have been thinking about this for the past few days, almost non-stop, in fact. And in fact, with one single move, the Russian counterpunch was so effective because, first of all, the European Commission has been saying that Russia cannot own the gas and own the pipelines in Southeast Europe as well, even though Bulgaria and Hungary were saying it's okay with us as long as we reap some profit in transit rights. It's fine with us, and we need the gas. So they were stalling this thing in Brussels all the time under pressure from the Americans, of course. And the Americans also pressured the weak link, the Bulgarians. So Russia looked at the situation and said, okay, you don't want our pipeline? No problem. We're going to build a pipeline anyway. So instead of building the pipeline to Southeast Europe, they built it to Turkey. So what do they get? Gazprom had already spent like $5 billion in financing, engineering costs, projections, you name it. So they didn't lose that kind of money. It's already invested in the pipeline. They reroute the pipeline to Turkey. They build a major hub in the Turkish-Greek border. This is the plan for medium term. And if the EU wants to buy gas from Russia, they will have to pay for the transportation costs on top of it. How stupid is that? They were going to get the pipelines before, and everything was included in the price. You had the gas and you had the pipelines. You just pay the price and you had the gas at your door. Now you have to go to Turkey. You have to pay Turkey for the transportation costs on top of paying Gazprom for the gas. So how stupid is that? So this was one single counter push by the Russians. It changed the whole equation.
Will Russia orient itself much more towards the East in reaction to the crisis in the Ukraine?
It's already happening, Lars, in fact. And I would say that this accelerated a Russian push not only towards making very serious energy deals with China, but in more investment integration, Chinese banks be more invested in the Russian economy as well, currency swaps. They are trying to build a parallel or an alternative, a SWIFT system that would include certainly many countries in East Asia and obviously Iran. Don't forget that China and Iran, they have a parallel SWIFT for a long time now to escape and evade Western sanctions. So after Ukraine, and especially I would say the first few months after Ukraine, when they were still discussing the deals, the gas deals, the Russians and the Chinese, now their strategic partnership is really, really solid and involves politics, economics, finance, and of course military as well. Don't forget that the Chinese soon are going to get the S-400 missile system. When the Russians unroll the S-500, which around 2017, probably they're going to sell it to the Chinese as well. Inside the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, inside the G20, they are very, very close. So yes, I would say that the Kremlin looked at the way they were being treated, sidelined, criticized, and in fact, practically expurgated from a decent relationship with the EU because of the pressure of the US, of course, the special relationship US-UK, etc. And they say, well, look, we don't need to depend on them. We would like to have a free market from Lisbon to Vladivostok, as Putin said a few years ago. That still applies. But if they don't want us, okay, we look east. And the possibilities for Russia in the east are gigantic. Putin is visiting New Delhi. They're going to clinch more deals with India. Russia-India relationship was always very strong. They can sell their energy not only to China, but also to Japan and South Korea, which are dying to get more Russian energy as well. So that's it. They don't need to rely on Europe. And it's I would say, Europe loses much more than Russia with this new state of affairs.
So the Europeans are shooting in their own foot once again.
Yes, completely. Because, you know how Brussels work. I had, I would say, the displeasure to go to Brussels a lot, especially in the 90s. So I understood how the EU, the EC work, the bureaucratic layers, the infighting. It's an absolute mess. And maybe, not crystal ball, of course, in the long run, the EU is doomed. It will fragment, or it will have what it already has unofficially now. Two-speed EU and probably a three-speed EU sooner or later. The way it is run by bureaucrats with, no popular consultation, you name it, and, the commissioners who are in charge of key disciplines, they are not very good at diplomacy, to say the least. Look at the way they're trying to reorient their energy policy vis-a-vis Russia, and they keep blaming the Russians, but they are not constructive in their negotiations. And in fact, they could have, if they were independent, in fact, they could have struck a deal with Iran years ago, bypassing the American sanctions, to guarantee an alternative source of energy from Iran to the European Union. But because they are vassals, they are still subjected to US sanctions. They apply their own sanctions mirroring the US sanctions, just like they did with Russia. And they shoot themselves in their heads once again in terms of always complaining about we don't have alternative sources of energy or suppliers because they don't try hard enough.
Do you see Germany as the biggest vassal state of the US in Europe?
Oh, in fact, I would have to ask you this question, Lars, really. As an outsider in terms of German politics, what I'm getting from Germany, echoes from German friends and sources or reading German media, there is I would say, a very clear split between powerful sectors of German industry and business and ruling politicians, Merkel and Cotteri around her. They see the future of Germany as a global trading power as doing more and more deals across Eurasia, not with the West, not with the EU, not with the US, with Eurasia as a whole. And the two major powers in Eurasia are Russia and China. Of course, with China, Germany-China relationship, it will improve even more after Xi Jinping's visit to Germany this year, when he proposed the new Silk Road, which will finish where? Essentially in Germany. From Duisburg to Berlin, the final point of the Silk Road is Germany. And obviously, just for German business, two-way trade in high-speed rail across Eurasia is a dream come true for Germany as a global trading power. With Russia, it's more complicated because they're complementary. Germany can invest even more in Russia and modernize Russia in a faster pace. And in turn, they get all the energy that they need to turbocharge this super Porsche, global trading Porsche, right? So it's for businessmen in Germany, it's absolute, as they have been saying, and that famous editorial at Handelsblatt saying that it's ridiculous to pick a fight with Russia, totally applies. But I think the message hasn't filtered to, I would say, the top levels of German politicians at the moment, Merkel included.
Yeah, but would you say that good relationships between Germany and Russia are essential for a peaceful development of Europe?
Totally. I would say it's absolutely essential. And in fact, we see a Chinese way, a win-win situation for Germany because they expand as a trading global power. Their reach in Eurasia would be ideal in German's terms. We can have this sort of free market between Lisbon and Vladivostok in practice. We can have the new Silk Roads integrating not only these countries across Central Asia, Turkey and Iran, because they're important crossroads, and Eastern Europe as well, all the way to Germany. Everybody wins if we have this. At the moment, this new Berlin Wall through Ukraine between Europe and Russia, nobody wins. And of course, the Chinese, their strategy is already laid out. They are betting that from now to 2025, in 10 years, they will build I would say 3 Silk Roads they are building at the moment. 2 over land, one via Siberia, another one via Central Asia, the Maritime Silk Road through the Indian Ocean. In 10 years, this will be working. I have been following China closely for the past 20 years. And when they set out a huge a target like this, they will do it. And they have enough money to pull it off. Even if it's, $500 billion, $600 billion, for them it's peanuts when you have almost $4 trillion in the reserves.
Yeah, as you've already mentioned before, this year we saw a big energy deal struck by Russia and China. Do you think the Sino-Russian partnership in energy is only at the beginning, and will both countries, China and Russia, bring the petrodollar to its end?
Well, in terms of the energy relationship, it's already there. Because don't forget, these are 2 major pipelines worth $725 billion in terms of deals. It's huge, it's enormous. It's the beginning. They could build another 2 or 3 more within the next 10 to 20 years. China's energy sufficiency is not guaranteed, and they need to transfer progressively from coal to natural gas to other forms of energy. So that's a given. In terms of moving away from the petrodollar, they have already started it. They are working towards currency swaps among the BRICS. It's already a done deal. More currency swaps between Russia and China from now on. If they install their parallel SWIFT mechanism next year, there's more or less a deadline for between March and April next year. They could start it. It's already a done deal. Russia could use, for instance, the Union Pay system that the Chinese have for settling credit transactions. Very, very, all over Asia, you can use Union Pay all over the place. In Europe, it's more complicated. Like I have one of these cards when I go to Europe. I have to look at which banks accept it, like in Germany or in France. But in UK, for instance, is accepted all over the place. So all these moves together point towards a flight, a progressive, slowly but surely, flight away from the dollar, and in the near future to medium term, away from the petrodollar as well, including gas transactions, which are related to oil transactions as well. We could have, that's something that was mooted 2 or 3 years ago, of a gas OPEC, including, of course, Russia, Iran, and maybe Qatar. Qatar was interested as well. This could happen in the near future and away from the petrodollar. Of course, not with Qatar, because Qatar is a vassal state of the US, of course. But all these moves point towards a basket of currencies emerging for transactions all over the world, the BRICS and many other developing countries jumping on it, and of course moves away from the petrodollar.
What are your thoughts on the heavy gold buying undertaken by the states of China and Russia, respectively of countries within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization?
They are buying, especially the Russians and the Chinese. The Chinese last year, in fact, they were buying gold like crazy, and the Russians these past few months as well. When the Chinese internationalized yuan for good, you can now trade in yuan in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Frankfurt, in London. Soon you'll be all over, all European capitals, all Asian capitals. So we could have a real international yuan by 2017, 2018. And the Chinese want to back it up with gold as well. Not only their own reserves, but also in gold. And the Russians, same thing. They want to back the ruble with gold. There is a discrepancy in the buying physical gold in the markets, and I'm sure you're much more of an expert than I am on this subject. And of course, trading gold in paper, because in paper it's huge quantities that are traded in derivatives. But countries actually buying physical gold, when you look at the numbers, they're much smaller. But right, and still, they are shoring up their gold reserves. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, and they have it at their home. You know, they have not the gold abroad like the Netherlands.
Not at the Fed in New York.
Yeah. Okay, will the 21st century, the century of Eurasia, respectively the Asia Pacific?
Well, I have been betting on it for a while now. And in fact, this year I wrote 2 long pieces stating my case that the 21st century will be an Eurasian century, of course, with the major power, China, but China integrating or helping to integrate Eurasia through trade and commerce. So this means that there are at least, 25 to 30 nations, maybe more, that will profit from this Eurasian integration, which is linked to the new Silk Roads, of course. It's linked to China capital. Instead of China absorbing foreign investment, now China, with their huge reserves, they're starting to export Chinese capital and credit all over East Asia in Eurasia. And obviously this Eurasia, I also include, of course, European Union, but especially Germany. In the long term, in fact, I would say maybe from 2025 ahead, we can see the establishment for good of a trade commerce alliance involving especially Russia, China, and Germany. The three of them would benefit highly from that. What we have, of course, is the direct consequence of this thing happening, which is the US more or less marginalized from Eurasia in trade and commerce, cultural exchanges, you name it as well. And obviously people in Washington, Wall Street, they can look at the possible long term. And they will be doing it, they are already doing everything to prevent this closer Eurasian integration, which means essentially Russia, China, Germany, and in between two very important nations as well, which are go-betweens, Iran and Turkey.
My final question for today would be, what do you expect for 2015?
It's going to be a really hardcore year. There are some, I would say there are two very important things happening that we can see already now. If there's going to be a deal between the P5+1 and Iran by the summer of 2015, what terms, of course, if these sanctions are going to be abolished virtually the next day, which is what the Iranians want, and this is non-negotiable for them, this means that the next day we're going to have the Europeans as a whole disembarking in Tehran, mission after mission after mission, to invest in Iran, invest in the Iranian economy, upgrade Iranian energy infrastructure, and start doing business with Iran like big time. This will be a game changer because for Europe, the benefits are obvious in the long term. For Iran, don't even mention it, and they will emerge something that they already are, but prevented by sanctions and boycott from the West. It's not fully realized. The big power in Southwest Asia. And of course, they'll keep doing their business with their deals as well with both Russia and China. So Iran is absolutely central to what happens next in this huge area from Southwest Asia to East Asia, Eurasia as a whole, right? And of course, how the confrontation between the Empire of Chaos, once again, with its subplot NATO against Russia in Ukraine. Sooner or later, inside Germany itself, they're going to see how crazy this is to antagonize Russia because of Ukraine based on extremely faulty assumptions, I would say. And obviously we'll have a new US Senate, which is going to be even more antagonistic, not only towards Russia, but against China as well. And we'll have the preparation for the American presidential campaign 2016, where we're going to have, can you imagine if we have Hillary Clinton, which is a warmonger essentially, against Jeb Bush, it's the Bush family. What else we need to say?
Yeah, but
so it doesn't look good.
Yeah, but if this would be the case, if those two guys would compete with each other for the presidency of the US, what does this show us about the US?
Well, it shows that it's an empire of chaos in a dynastic mood on top of it. We already know, in fact, most of the developing world already knows how the empire of chaos works, how they sow chaos and how they are hit by chaos and how the blowback contaminates regions and regions across the world. And obviously everybody knows that it's basically a one-party system, roughly subdivided between some that are not exactly hardcore warmongers and right-wing wackos of the Dr. Strangelove variety, and dynastic on top of it. We're going to have an alternance of the Clinton system and the Bush system. Don't forget that Obama, he has been controlled and surrounded essentially by the Clinton system. He's not his own man. He cannot be his own man because he's aloof, he's not connected, he doesn't schmooze, which is the way you run politics in Washington. So the Clintonites have been controlling and remote controlling him all the time. And if we have the Bush dynasty back, we all know what to expect.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Pepe, for this interview.
Thank you, Lars. It was a great pleasure. Thanks to you and thanks to Matterhorn.
Thank you.